The economy is plumbing.
It really is. And once you start seeing the pipes, you just can't unsee them.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Wednesday, March 4, 2026, and we are on a mission today.
A very specific mission.
Right. Because we have this stack of incredibly dense sources sitting in front of us. I mean, we are talking raw maritime trade data, dry government procurement contracts, and labor statistics.
Which on the surface sounds like the most boring reading list imaginable.
Exactly. It sounds like a cure for insomnia. But we are going to use these documents to reveal a hidden truth about how the world actually works for you. Because when the global system enters a transitional period, the first thing that breaks isn't the headline asset price on your television screen.
No, it's the boring, invisible layer underneath.
Yeah. We tend to think of the economy as markets, like just a bunch of blinking green and red numbers, but it's actually a series of physical and digital pipes.
Which is a crucial framework for what we are doing today. Because if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, we have three seemingly disconnected stories right now. We've got cargo ships in the Middle East, AI software in Washington, and a routine jobs report on Wall Street.
And most people treat those as three totally separate news alerts.
Right, but they are actually the exact same story. They are all about risk being repriced inside those pipes. And when the internal pipes reprice, what everyone assumes is just a temporary blip starts to become a permanent structural reality.
Okay, let's unpack the first pipe. I was reading this Reuters report this morning, and the numbers actually made me do a double take.
The insurance premium.
Yes. Everyone assumes the Strait of Hormuz only matters because of the physical supply of oil.
Yeah.
You watch the evening news, and the entire focus is just, is the crude flowing? Are the boats moving? But here is where it gets really interesting. The less obvious truth is that even if the oil exists, even if it is pumped out of the ground and ready to go, it absolutely does not matter if you cannot insure the hull of the ship carrying it.
Well, it's worse than a physical bottleneck. I mean, think about it. If a canal is blocked by a grounded ship, you send in tugboats, you clear the debris, and you move on.
Yeah, you physically fix it.
Exactly. But when an underwriter in a comfortable office in London hits cancel on their keyboard, you can't dredge that. You have to completely renegotiate global financial risk. It's an insurance shock disguised as a supply shock.
Let me hit you with the empirical evidence here, because the scale is wild. According to Reuters, war risk premiums for shipping have surged from about 0.2% to up to a full 1% of a ship's total value. And that happened in just 48 hours.
Which is a massive jump when you look at the actual dollar amounts.
Right. If you own a massive vessel worth $100 million, that is $1 million toll just to cross the water. One trip.
And that's if you can even get the policy.
Exactly. We are talking about major systemic marine insurers, Skold, North, the P&I Club, the American Club, putting out official notices terminating their war risk coverage. And that takes effect tomorrow, March 5.
Yeah.
On top of that, MS&AD just halted underwriting in the waters around Iran and Israel entirely, just completely stopped.
And what's fascinating here is the physical consequence of that digital paperwork. Because of those terminated policies, you currently have 150 to 200 massive vessels just sitting there.
Just floating.
They are anchored, completely trapped around Hormuz. Keep in mind, this is a choke point that handles 20% of the world's oil shipments. Those ships are paralyzed.
Not because the water is physically dangerous to navigate right now.
No, because the financial risk of moving is simply too high to justify the transit. The paperwork won't let them move.
It's wild. And now the U.S. government is having to step in to look at the plumbing. Reuters is reporting that U.S. Navy escorts are on the table. But more interestingly, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, is looking at providing political risk insurance just to keep things moving.
Because the private market is freezing up.
Right. London insurers are technically still offering some cover, but the rates are skyrocketing to the point of absurdity.
This is where we need to apply some systems analysis. The general public thinks of oil as a single, straightforward market. You put a hose in the ground, the liquid comes out, it goes into a refinery, and then into your car.
A straight line.
But oil is actually a complex stack. It is production, then shipping, then insurance, then financing, then refining. A strike in the insurance layer mimics a physical supply shock perfectly. It strands the oil without a single well ever having to shut down.
Wow.
The bottleneck simply shifted from the physical extraction pipe to the financial insurance pipe. And the real question is, who absorbs that risk and where does that cost land next?
Okay, here is the bee sting on this. Here is the consensus view. Everyone tells you Watch Brent crude prices to understand the oil market. That is the default framing we hear every day.
But the real leading indicator is the insurance quote. That quote determines whether those barrels are actually tradable, not just pumpable. If you cannot insure the hull of the ship, the cargo effectively doesn't exist to the global market.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about what a marine insurance premium in London is doing? Because if the U.S. backstops the insurance, the system moves again. But the price of moving it rises permanently.
And that cost doesn't just evaporate into thin air, it shows up as hidden inflation. You will feel it in freight costs, in the price of plastics, in the food at your local grocery store, and literally everything that rides on global shipping.
It's like a tax.
It is a tax. The risk repricing inside that oceanic pipe eventually leaks right out into your wallet.
The invisible layer dictates the physical reality. Now, that idea of a hidden architecture dictating reality on the ocean, it's actually the exact same dynamic happening in the tech world right now.
The AI procurement story.
Yes, only instead of marine insurers, it's government procurement officers. Let's pivot from ocean plumbing to digital plumbing. In tech discourse, we treat AI safety like a philosophical debate. You hear it everywhere, op-eds and tech panels arguing about the nature of consciousness, existential risk, or what it means to be human.
It's very academic.
Right. But in the trenches of government contracting, AI safety isn't a philosophy seminar anymore. It is becoming a strict, legally binding architectural reality.
I'm glad you brought this up because this is a perfect example of how abstract fears solidify into concrete rules. When you deal with government procurement, the philosophical debate ends and the mechanical reality begins.
Because it's very binary.
Exactly. It becomes a simple binary question. What does the contract legally allow, and what does the software architecture technically enforce?
I was looking at the data from Nextgov and Business Insider. It's fascinating. The acquisition pathways for the federal government actually dictate the rules of the game here. You've got these different bureaucratic lanes.
Right, the FR pathways.
Yeah. There's FR Part 12, which is part of the federal acquisition regulation, and that essentially defaults to whatever commercial terms the vendor wants. Then you have FR Part 15, which allows for bespoke, highly customized negotiations, but it's incredibly slow and painful.
Glacial.
And then you have what are called other transactions, or OTs. These offer massive flexibility and speed for huge Department of Defense deals, sometimes up to $200 million.
Those pathways dictate both the speed of adoption and the guardrails placed on the technology. And what we are seeing with OpenAI's contract language is a masterclass in establishing those guardrails.
It really is.
Their published excerpt says the technology can be used for all lawful purposes, which sounds broad, but then it specifically references a web of existing historical frameworks to define what lawful actually means in this context.
Yeah, the list of references is intense. It cites DoD Directive 3000.09 from January 25, 2023, which is the Pentagon's rulebook for autonomous weapons. It cites the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. It cites the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, Executive Order 12333.
They are covering all the bases.
They really are. It even cites the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the 19th century law that essentially prevents the U.S. military from acting as a domestic police force, anchoring a 21st century cutting-edge artificial intelligence to a law from 1878 is wild.
It shows how desperate the system is to map new tech onto old scaffolding.
And Business Insider just reported that OpenAI is actively amending its Pentagon deal right now to explicitly ban intentional domestic surveillance of U.S. persons and nationals. If an intelligence agency like the NSA wants to use it for that specific purpose, they are legally forced to get a follow-on contract modification.
This raises an important point about the nature of technology. Every general-purpose technology throughout history, from the combustion engine to the internet, eventually becomes dual-use. It can be used for civilian benefit, or it can be militarized.
Right.
The real battle is never about whether it will be used by the government. The battle is over who writes the rules of engagement and where those rules actually live. Do they live in the law, in the contracts, or in the code itself?
See, here's the bee sting on this one. Everyone in the tech press is obsessing over the specific legal words in these contracts. They're treating it like a courtroom drama, focusing entirely on the text.
But the bigger lever isn't the contract at all. It's the deployment layer. Think about it. When you have cloud-only delivery, the vendor maintains ultimate physical control over the software. They hold the on-off switches.
The infrastructure itself is the law.
Exactly. The architecture of the software physically enforces the boundaries, regardless of what the legal phrase all lawful purposes technically permits. If OpenAI decides a use case violates their terms, it's not just a breach of contract where you sue them later.
The server just turns off.
The AI stops working. That is a hard architectural boundary enforced by code, not lawyers.
So the AI governance era has officially moved from op-eds to procurement templates. And this matters immensely to you, the listener, because templates scale.
They become the default.
Right. The very first version of this, built for the Pentagon, with all its restrictions and kill switches, becomes the default boilerplate. That boilerplate will eventually govern the AI systems the general public interacts with. The rules being written in these dry government contracts today are the exact rules that will shape your digital life tomorrow.
Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied, and the application here is recognizing that the future of AI isn't being decided by ethicists on a stage. It is being decided in procurement boilerplate by bureaucrats and cloud architects.
That is such a wild shift in perspective. Okay, let's look at the ultimate pipe, the flow of money itself. This is the irony of the week.
How so?
Well, the world is watching drones in the sky, we're watching trapped oil tankers in the Gulf, we're analyzing cutting-edge AI defense contracts, but the most consequential number for your mortgage rate or your auto loan is a boring payroll estimate dropping on Friday.
The jobs report. It really is the ultimate piece of economic plumbing. Because if the maritime story was about repricing the risk of moving physical goods, and the tech story was about repricing the risk of digital architecture, this is about repricing the risk of capital itself.
According to a Reuters survey, the U.S. jobs report for February is dropping this Friday, March 6, and the forecast is looking at roughly 150,000 jobs added. Markets are aggressively watching this single piece of labor data while they are simultaneously trying to price in all the AI-driven disruption across various sectors that we just talked about.
Which is incredibly complex.
So it's like the market is trying to solve two massive contradictory equations at the exact same time.
Yes, and the mechanics of this are crucial to understand because it often feels counterintuitive to people outside of finance. The labor market data directly informs the Federal Reserve.
The central thermostat.
Exactly. Think of the jobs report not as an economic report card where a high score is an A+, but as the Fed's thermostat. If the jobs number is running hot, meaning lots of hiring, wages going up, the Fed has to keep interest rates high to blast the AC and cool the economy down.
Right.
If the jobs number is weak, it pulls their timeline in, making rate cuts more likely. Either way, that thermostat setting decides the discount rate for absolutely everything else in the economy.
Which brings us to our final bee sting, the consensus trap here. The consensus treats the monthly jobs data like a factual static snapshot of the real underlying economy. People look at it and say, oh, 150,000 jobs, the economy is doing exactly this well.
But in a transition period like we're in right now, it is not a snapshot at all. It is a policy trigger. And policy triggers move asset prices far faster than actual on-the-ground economic fundamentals.
Because the market front-runs the policy.
Exactly. The stock market isn't reacting to the jobs themselves. It is reacting to what the Federal Reserve is going to do to the price of money because of those jobs.
So you have to stop watching the jobs print as generic good news or bad news. If 150,000 jobs are added, don't just think, oh, people are getting hired, that's nice. Instead, you need to ask, what does this do to the price of money?
That is the only question that matters.
Because the price of money ultimately decides who is forced to refinance their reality next. If the jobs report is too hot and the price of money stays high, that tech startup building the AI we just talked about might not get its next round of funding.
Or that family might not be able to afford a new house because the mortgage rate is sitting at 7%.
The real estate developer might have to pause construction on a new apartment building.
That is exactly the right lens. Risk is being repriced in the capital markets just as aggressively as it is being repriced in the shipping lanes of the Middle East. It is the same mechanism, just a different pipe.
Let's bring this all together. Today's deep dive was all about the plumbing. We looked at marine insurance premiums jumping and stranding massive amounts of oil in the Gulf without a single well shutting down.
A repricing of physical risk.
We looked at abstract AI governance migrating into concrete, binding procurement boilerplate, and cloud-controlled architecture.
A repricing of technological risk.
And we looked at labor data acting as a strict policy trigger that sets the discount rate for everything in your financial life. The old model of thinking says these are three totally separate stories happening in completely different parts of the world, handled by different experts.
But the data tells us they are the exact same story. We are witnessing the structural repricing of global risk right beneath the surface. The old economic model assumed shocks were temporary, and that flooding the system with liquidity would fix everything.
Right, just print money and wait it out.
But the new reality is that once the pipes reprice, what looks temporary on the surface is actually a structural shift in the foundation.
It completely changes how you read the news. You stop looking at the water and start looking at the pipes. Next time, we are looking at the shadow inventory quietly building in the global economy, where it's hiding, and why it's going to completely change the next inflation cycle. You won't want to miss that.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. If the real rules of the modern world are being written in obscure maritime insurance premiums, dry government procurement templates, and statistical policy triggers, you have to ask yourself, how much of the headline news we consume every single day is just noise distracting us from the people who actually have their hands on the valves?